Imagine being arrested for trespassing on your own land. Sounds insane, right? But for one man, that nightmare wasn't fiction. It was his life. Hey there, I hope you and your family are doing well, staying safe and holding tight to what's yours. Because the story I'm about to tell you is going to make your heart ache and your blood boil. It's about injustice, it's about power, but most of all, it's about one man's fight to reclaim what should have never been taken. His name is Calvin Mercer, a war veteran, a son, a fighter, and the rightful owner of a piece of land that carried his family's entire legacy. And yet, somehow, the law said he didn't belong there. The air in the courtroom that day? Thick, tense. You could feel it pressing on your chest. Every eye was fixed on him, on Calvin. Graying hair, scruffy beard, shirt sleeves rolled up like a man still ready to work the land with his bare hands. But today he wasn't planting crops. He was defending himself against a charge of trespassing on the land he was born on. The prosecutor stepped forward, polished, sharp-suited, voice like a blade. Mr. Mercer, are you aware that you're being charged with unlawful trespassing on property legally owned by Langston Holdens? The words hung in the air. Calvin didn't flinch. He stared straight ahead. His fingers curled around the railing. His jaw tightened. And then his voice, low, gravelly, and full of fire, cut through the silence. I never left. A ripple of confusion passed through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged glances. Even the clerk paused mid-note. The judge banged the gavel, eyebrows raised. Mr. Mercer, would you care to explain that statement? But Calvin wasn't looking at the judge. His eyes were somewhere else. Back in time, back to a place where the soil still held the footprints of his childhood. Calvin Mercer's world had once been small, but full. He grew up on a quiet farm where the rhythm of life was simple. Sunrise, work, supper, stars. His father was a man of few words, but every calloused hand, every fence he mended, every seed he planted, spoke volumes. His mother, a quiet force of nature, kept the house together with canned peaches and gospel hymns. The land was theirs, not bought on borrowed money or built on somebody else's sweat. It was earned. And Calvin, he grew up with dirt on his knees and the smell of hay in his shirt. He knew that land like the back of his hand. Every tree, every stone, every fence post he helped his daddy fix. That was the future, simple, secure, until the war came. He was just 19 when he signed the papers, said goodbye to his mama's prayers and his daddy's firm handshake, promised to come back, promised to rebuild. But the war? It doesn't give back what it takes. At first it was drills, camaraderie, orders. Then came the gunfire, the loss, the numbness. Calvin saw friends fall. He learned how to keep walking even when everything in his body said to crawl. When he finally stepped off that military bus years later, he expected tears, a hug, some kind of closure. Instead, the only thing waiting was silence. His father had passed, his mother barely holding on, the land fading. But he was home, and he was ready to fight, not with bullets, but with his hands, to rebuild what was left. Only the war wasn't done with him yet. Calvin Mercer stepped off the bus with nothing but a duffel bag, worn-out boots, and a heart full of hope. He had seen fire, seen death, seen the kind of silence that only comes after screaming stops. But here, home, the air smelled different. The sun felt warmer. The field stretched wide, golden under the afternoon sky, and for one fragile moment, he believed he could start again. He imagined it, fixing up the old barn, repainting the porch, bringing cattle back to the pasture. Maybe one day a wife, kids, a dog chasing chickens like he once had. He took the gravel path slow, dust rising behind each step. The old farmhouse sat at the top of the hill, its roof a little sagged, but still there, like it had waited just for him. But inside, the reality hit harder than any battlefield. His father, gone, his mother, thin, tired, her hands rough from holding together what little she could. The barn was empty, the fences leaned, the soil dry. She had sold what she could to survive. She'd held on for as long as possible, but time and loss are merciless. Still, Calvin didn't blame her. He just tightened his jaw and said, "I'll fix it. We'll fix it. This is home. I'm not going anywhere." And then the VA doctors told him he needed treatment. They called it PTSD, said the war was still inside him, that the panic attacks, the insomnia, the flashes, they weren't weakness, they were wounds. He resisted at first. He had just gotten home. He couldn't leave again, but the nightmares didn't stop. And when they told him it would only be for 3 months, just enough to get his feet under him, he agreed. 3 months. That's all. But when he came back, the first thing he saw was the sign, "Property of Langston Holdings." At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe a neighbor had parked something on the edge. Maybe it was construction. But then he saw the gate, the chain, the lock, his house, his land, gone. His breath left his body, his knees nearly buckled. He stormed into town, his voice echoing through the courthouse hallway. He demanded answers. The clerk handed him a file, a signature. His name, clear as day, signed at the bottom of a deed. A sale, a legal transfer. Only he hadn't signed anything. He hadn't sold a damn thing. His mother had passed during his treatment. There were no living relatives to speak for the land. No one to say this wasn't right. But Calvin knew. He knew what his hands had touched. He knew what his father had died for. He knew what the soil smelled like after rain. And he knew this wasn't over. They thought he was just a tired old vet, just another forgotten name with scars no one could see. But Calvin Mercer, he wasn't the type to lay down and die quietly. He had fought on foreign soil for this country. Now he was going to fight on his own soil for the one thing they never had the right to take, his home. Calvin Mercer stood in the courtroom like a man who'd seen war, because he had. But this battlefield was different. There were no bullets, only pens, paperwork, and people in expensive suits who thought they owned the truth. His hands rested at his sides, clenched, scarred from years of hard labor and survival. The courtroom lights were too bright, the whispers too loud, but he stood tall, anchored by everything they had tried to take. Across the room, the lead attorney for Langston Holdings, Patrick Langley, slick hair, smoother voice, stepped forward. He adjusted his designer tie, smiled at the jury like he was telling a bedtime story. "Mr. Mercer," he began, tone dripping with false concern, "you claim this land was taken from you illegally, and yet..." He held up a thick stack of papers. "These documents show a clear signature, your name, on the deed. Are you suggesting you don't recognize your own handwriting?" Calvin's jaw twitched. He didn't speak right away. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he stepped forward and said, quietly but firmly, "I never signed anything. That document's a lie." A soft murmur passed through the room. Langley chuckled like he was humoring a child. "Mr. Mercer, are you aware that memory issues are common in veterans who suffer from PTSD?" He raised an eyebrow. "Is it possible, even just possible, that you've forgotten?" That's when Calvin snapped. He slammed his hand against the table, a single, sharp, thunderous crack. The entire courtroom jumped. The judge lifted a hand. The gallery went still. Calvin leaned in, his voice low but burning. "My memory is fine. I remember every tree on that land, every fence post I helped my daddy set. I remember burying him under the old oak where he used to watch the sun go down. And I sure as hell remember that I never sold my home. Langley didn't flinch. He was too polished for that. He just offered a little shrug, like he pitied Calvin. With all due respect, Mr. Mercer, the law doesn't operate on memory. It operates on evidence. And with that, he held up the forged deed, clean, signed. Official, like truth printed on paper. Calvin stared at it, at his own name, his legacy, used like a weapon against him. They were twisting the story, painting him as unstable. A broken vet clinging to a life he didn't own anymore. And for the first time, Calvin felt cornered. But if the law only cared about evidence, then damn it, he was going to find some. That night, Calvin didn't go back to the shelter. He didn't sleep. He walked the roads of his town, the streets he used to ride bikes down as a kid, and thought about every inch of the land that used to be his. And then one name came to mind. Eli Granger, his best friend, his blood brother since they were 6, the one who never went to war, but stayed behind and became a reporter instead. If anyone could help him find the truth, it was Eli. Calvin Mercer found Eli Granger right where he expected, tucked into a corner booth at Mabel's Diner, flipping through a weathered leather notebook with his usual black coffee half full and forgotten. Eli hadn't changed much over the years. Still wore glasses, too big for his face. Still scribbled his notes with the same urgency, like he was trying to beat the clock. And still had that look, that mix of curiosity and quiet anger whenever something didn't smell right. As Calvin walked in, the little bell above the door jingled, and Eli looked up. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then his eyes widened and softened. "Well, I'll be damned," Eli said, standing up slowly. "They told me you were back, but I didn't expect to see you here, not like this." Calvin slid into the booth across from him. No time for small talk. "I need your help." Eli studied him, that reporter brain already kicking in. "Let me guess, Langston Holdings." Calvin nodded, jaw tight. "They took my land, Eli, forged my name, and now they're trying to make me look like I'm just some washed-up vet who can't remember what's real." Eli leaned back, exhaled slow. "You're not the first. They've been swallowing up land all over this county, farms, small shops. Every time the paperwork's perfect, no loose ends, no noise, just gone." Calvin clenched his fists. "It's a damn lie." Eli nodded slowly, then picked up his pen. "Then let's prove it." From that moment on, the fight had a second soldier. They didn't wait. Within hours, they were buried in dusty files, county archives, and courthouse basements. Eli brought out binders labeled with names of families Calvin knew, folks he grew up with, all with the same pattern. One bidder, one buyer, Langston Holdings, the same fake auctions, the same missing notices, the same signatures, always just too clean. And late one night, while Eli's desk was lit by nothing but a flickering desk lamp, he let out a whistle and held up a yellow document. "This right here, this is your transfer of deed." He slid the page over. "And here, this is the county auction report for your land." Calvin frowned. "Auction?" Eli nodded, his voice sharp with purpose. "That's how they made it look legal. Your property was listed as part of a public auction. But look here." He pointed to the small, nearly hidden line at the bottom. Only one bidder, Langston Holdings. A cold fire lit in Calvin's chest. Eli's voice grew harder, more focused. There was no notice, no competition, no chance. It wasn't an auction, it was a setup. And now we've got a paper trail. He slapped the file shut. They rigged it, they stole it, and now... He looked up at Calvin. We make them answer for it. For the first time since this nightmare began, Calvin felt something shift. This wasn't just a feeling in his gut anymore. This was proof. A crack in the perfect lie. And they weren't going to stop here. Calvin Mercer knew the moment they found out he had proof, they'd come for him. Langston Holdings wasn't built on handshakes and good intentions. It was built on intimidation, silence, and the kind of wealth that made men disappear without leaving a ripple. The first warning came like a whisper wrapped in static. His phone rang, no name, just a number. He picked up. "You're making a mistake, Mercer." The voice was smooth, deliberate, too calm. "Who is this?" A pause, then, "Someone who thinks you should leave town." "While you still can." Calvin's grip on the phone tightened. "Is that a threat?" A chuckle, almost polite. "Call it a suggestion. There's nothing here for you anymore. No home, no future. Walk away before you lose something else." Click. Silence. That night, as Calvin left Eli Granger's office and crossed the dark parking lot behind the diner, he noticed a black SUV creeping along the curb. It rolled to a slow stop a few feet away. The windows were tinted, but one lowered just enough to show the silhouette of a man inside. The same voice, unmistakable, called out, "This is your last chance, Mercer. Turn around. Leave." Calvin didn't flinch, didn't stop. He just kept walking, fists clenched, shoulders square. He'd seen men like this before. They wore power like armor and hid behind money like it made them untouchable. But Calvin had faced worse. He'd faced mortars, tracers, death itself. These men, just another enemy in a different uniform. But deep down, Calvin knew the next time wouldn't be a warning. And he was right. It started with a smell, sharp, acrid, wrong. Then came the glow. An orange flicker cutting through the darkness like a flame, licking at the edge of memory. His motel was on fire. By the time he got there, flames were curling through the windows, clawing up the walls, devouring everything he had left. His clothes, his notebooks, the printed documents Eli had given him. Smoke poured out in thick, choking clouds. The heat pressed against his chest. His throat burned, his eyes watered. Sirens screamed in the distance, but they felt miles away. Someone grabbed his arm as he moved to run inside. "You can't go in there." He barely heard them. His hands trembled, his jaw clenched. This wasn't an accident. The call, the SUV, the fire, they weren't trying to scare him anymore. They were trying to erase him. But Calvin Mercer didn't burn that easy. He showed up at Eli's office, still smelling like smoke, his skin singed in places, his eyes bloodshot, but alive. The last file copies were gone, but Eli wasn't done digging. He was clicking through a secure database, typing like a man possessed. Then he froze. His breath caught. "Calvin," he said, voice low, "I think we've got our smoking gun." He turned the laptop screen towards Calvin. At the top of the email, from Charles Langston to Langston Holdings Board. Subject, Carter Property, Acquisition Strategy. Calvin leaned in, pulse thudding. "See, Mercer will be away for treatment. Proceed with the acquisition. Push paperwork through if needed. Arrange documentation. Land is too valuable to risk. Make sure it's clean." It was all there, the plot, the plan, the timing. They hadn't stolen his land. They had waited for him to be vulnerable, then taken it, clean and quiet. And now? Now he had it in writing. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled. Reporters jammed into the back row, phones silenced but hearts thudding. All eyes locked onto the man standing once more at the defense table, Calvin Mercer, worn, weathered, but standing tall. He had been through hell, lies, threats, fire, but none of it had broken him, because now he had something they couldn't bury, The truth. Clutched in his hand was the printed email, the Langston Holden's confession. The words were clear, the intention undeniable. Across the room, Langston's lawyer, Patrick Langley, stood to deliver what he hoped would be the final blow. His voice was smooth but forced, the kind of confidence that cracks under pressure. "Your Honor," he began, "the plaintiff's case is based on speculation, unreliable documents, and, if I may, a misplaced sense of victimhood. There is no certified witness to the alleged fraud, no admissible authentication of this so-called email. Without proper verification, none of this is proof." Calvin felt his stomach drop. He glanced at Eli Granger sitting behind him, notebook in hand. Eli nodded back, steady, but even he looked uneasy. They'd done everything to get the email authenticated. But Langston Holdings had money, and money had a way of making evidence disappear. And then the courtroom doors swung open. A murmur rippled through the room. A man in a gray suit stepped in, face tense, eyes scanning. He walked briskly toward the judge's bench, ignoring the whispers. Calvin's breath caught. It was Nathan Cole, the notary public whose name had been on the fraudulent deed. The man who had disappeared. The man no one thought they'd ever find. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Sir, identify yourself." Nathan swallowed hard, then spoke. "My name is Nathan Cole. I was the notary for the Carter." He stopped, corrected himself. "The Mercer land transfer." Gasps. Langley leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Sit down, Mr. Langley," the judge snapped. "Let him speak." Nathan stepped forward, shoulders stiff, voice shaken but honest. "I was paid to forge that signature," he said. "Langston Holdens told me Mr. Mercer wasn't coming back, that he was too sick to fight. They offered me money, and I took it. I signed a lie, and I've regretted it every day since." A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Nathan continued. "I brought records, emails, bank transfers, everything." The judge leaned forward, suddenly far more interested. At the defense table, Langley looked like a man watching his empire collapse in slow motion. Calvin sat frozen, finally. The truth wasn't just spoken, it was documented, sworn, undeniable. The judge cleared his throat, removed his glasses, and spoke clearly. "Based on the evidence presented and the sworn testimony of Mr. Cole, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Calvin Mercer." For a moment, everything went still, then it hit him. He had won, his fists unclenched, his lungs filled. A breath he hadn't allowed himself to take in years finally escaped. He looked toward Eli, who gave him a nod, calm, quiet, but proud. And then toward the defense table, where Langston's lawyers sat frozen, their carefully crafted lies unraveling like wet thread. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court finds sufficient cause to initiate a formal investigation into Langston Holdings for fraud, bribery, and forgery. All around them, cameras clicked, reporters scribbled. But Calvin, he just sat there, not smiling, not cheering, just breathing, free. The courtroom emptied, but the echoes of justice stayed behind. Outside, chaos was building. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps like bees to honey. Microphones stretched like arms. Cameras flashed. Headlines were already being written in real time. Corporate giant exposed for land theft. Langston Holdings under federal investigation. Veteran wins back stolen property in landmark case. But Calvin Mercer didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't raise his arms or shout for joy. He just stood back and watched the empire that tried to destroy him crumble. Charles Langston, CEO of Langston Holdings, stormed out of the courthouse with 2 attorneys flanking him. Their crisp suits now sweat-stained, their confident strides suddenly unsure. Behind them, a federal investigator unfolded a sheet of paper and spoke directly into the sea of microphones. The Department of Justice has officially opened an investigation into Langston Holdings for corporate fraud, bribery, and criminal misappropriation of property. Gasps, murmurs, flashbulbs, questions. But Calvin, he just let out a slow, steady breath. Peace, not celebration, not vengeance, peace. Later that week, Calvin stood at the edge of his land, boots sunk into the soil like they'd never left. The wind moved slow through the tall grass, carrying the scent of home, of dirt and memory. The farmhouse still stood, leaning but proud. The oak tree at the top of the hill swayed gently, its limbs stretched wide like a father's arms. And Calvin, he just stood there taking it all in. This wasn't a return, this was a resurrection. Eli Granger pulled up in his old squeaky pickup truck, stepping out with a slow smile. "Didn't think I'd see you back here so soon." Calvin gave a half smirk. "Didn't think I'd make it back at all." Eli leaned against the fence and crossed his arms. "You didn't just come back. You took them down, you made them answer, and you made sure this place stayed yours." He kicked at the dirt and nodded. "Hell, you made sure a lot of other folks still have their homes too." Calvin let the words settle, because he knew now this fight had never just been about him. It had been about everybody like him who'd ever been told to sit down, be quiet, and accept what was taken. He turned and walked slowly up the hill to the oak tree. That was his father's spot, the place where he used to sit with a coffee cup at dawn and say things like, "God put the sun in the same place every day for a reason, son. It means you get to start over." When Calvin reached the top, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin. Inside was a handful of soil he had taken with him when he left for war. For years he kept it tucked away, a piece of home he couldn't let go. Now, kneeling at the roots of the tree, he let it spill slowly into the ground, back where it belonged. A quiet promise, a home reclaimed, a battle won. Not just against Langston Holdings, but against every doubt, every scar, every time someone tried to tell him who he wasn't. He stood, let the wind pass over him, and looked out at the land. It was his again, not because a judge said so, but because he never stopped fighting. So who was right? Who was wrong? Langston Holdings was wrong, not just legally, but morally. They didn't just steal land. They targeted a man they thought was too weak to fight back. They used the system like a weapon, and they did it because they could. But Calvin Mercer, he didn't just survive. He stood up, spoke out, and proved that truth can still win, even when the odds are rigged. So what's the lesson here? Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never let a piece of paper speak louder than a man's life. And never, ever stop fighting for what's rightfully yours. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed injustice? Have you ever fought for something no one believed you could win? Let us hear your voice. And if you believe in stories that inspire, that shake systems, that give voice to the unheard, subscribe to our channel, Black Women, because the world doesn't change until we start telling the stories that matter. And you are part of that. We'll see you in the next story.